Thank you so much. And now we turn to that other story of terror and survival, Asiana Flight 214 and the crash landing in San Francisco. Tonight, the 4 pilots who were in the cockpit flying the plane have talked to investigators, and ABC's anchor David Muir is in San Francisco with the latest word at this moment. Once again, David.
Diane, good evening to you. And we have just learned tonight from the NTSB, after interviewing those pilots, that not only was that pilot in training trying to land a 777 here in San Francisco for the first time, the pilot who was training him was serving as an instructor for the first time. And we've also learned tonight something else, that when that plane crash landed and the tail came off the back, 2 flight attendants were sucked out of the plane, ejected right onto the runway. They survived it. All of this tonight as we get a clearer view from the cockpit of what it's like to land one of those massive jets over San Francisco Bay.
Tonight, as that pilot in training is questioned by the NTSB, a rare view from inside the cockpit of what it's like to land over the bay at San Francisco's airport, seen in a video posted to YouTube by a KLM Airlines pilot. You can see through the cockpit window the descent over the bay, the angle for a safe landing on a clear blue day, much like the one we saw over the weekend, when pilots are cleared for a visual approach. But so many questions tonight about Asiana Airlines Flight 214. Inside the cockpit, the pilot in training sitting in the left seat, the captain training him on the right. And we know that the pilot being trained, Lee Gang-guk, had logged just 43 hours on the 777. He'd flown into San Francisco before, but this was his first time landing a 777 here. The pilot next to him did have experience, Lee Jung-min. He had 3,220 hours flying a 777, 33 landings in San Francisco.
They're running out.
Investigators want to know, what did that pilot with more experience advise the trainee to do? And they're asking about the 72 hours leading up to that flight. Did they have enough sleep? What did they eat and drink? Had anything happened in their personal lives? Late today, the CEO of Asiana Airlines arriving in San Francisco, overwhelmed by the cameras. Turning back, leaving the airport through a side entrance. And tonight, more survivors from that crash landing going home. So many of their injuries mirroring one another. Ved pulsing and his collarbone.
My collarbone is fractured, so kind of this is support.
Fei Zhang wearing that neck brace, motioning side to side what she felt on the plane. Dr. David Spain told us he saw so many of the same injuries.
And we saw a lot of what we call compression fractures, where the spinal column gets compressed.
Doctors telling us those injuries consistent with catastrophic movement side to side, the armrests jamming into the passenger sides, breaking ribs. And many passenger spines stretched and then compressed as they were whipped forward and backward, held down only by their lap belts. Late this afternoon, we heard from members of a martial arts team on that flight back to San Francisco.
The engine's really revved into high gear, just what? Like the captain was saying, oh no, we gotta get out of here. And then boom, the back end just lifted up, just really jolted everybody in their seats.
That boom, that jolt causing so many similar injuries. And Diane, I wanted to share with you, we've also learned from the NTSB that the jet actually had a 360-degree spin before landing there just off in the distance behind me across the bay. We know the debris field 2,000 feet long, and in fact the chairwoman of the NTSB telling me today, Diane, that a piece of that wing was found in the bay before the runway even started. And we should also add tonight that all of those pilots are cooperating with the NTSB.
Incredible details still unfolding. Thank you, David Muir, once again for bringing us the latest. And now we take you into that Florida courtroom. George Zimmerman on reporting in. And we have some late-breaking news now about that crash landing in San Francisco. The flight attendants, already celebrated for their heroism, have an even more dramatic story to tell tonight. It turns out 3 of those young crew members were catapulted out of the plane, still strapped in their seats. ABC's Cecilia Vega now on what we're learning right now. Cecilia.
Diane, good evening. We just heard, as you said, from 6 of those flight attendants, and we now know that 6 more remain hospitalized. This comes after today we hear from Washington that stricter rules are coming after what happened here for U.S. pilots.
As the search through the wreckage continues here, the FAA announcing today that first officers who fly passenger and cargo planes will have more training on the planes they operate and must increase their minimum flight time from 250 hours to 1,500. This as investigators continue looking into the experience of the Korean pilots at the helm of Flight 214. and the role the flight attendants played to save so many lives, some carrying passengers twice their weight on their backs to safety.
From their interviews, the flight attendants revealed to our investigators that they tried to expedite the passenger evacuation procedures by directing passengers to doors that weren't as crowded, and they were also fighting the fire.
All 12 of the flight attendants were seated near the plane's exits. When it crash-landed, the tail ripped off and 3 attendants were ejected, sent flying onto the runway. They survived.
Oh my God, that's scary.
An emergency chute inflated inside the cabin, trapping another flight attendant who also survived.
She was trying to give a signal to us by moving her leg like this, you know.
이번 일이
I hope for all the families who have suffered losses from this accident to recover as quickly as possible, and they are all in my prayers.
Today, members of that crew, some in wheelchairs, they're alongside the head flight attendant, that's Sully Sullenberger of Flight 214, who we heard from earlier this week. Now, all finally headed home.
We also heard late today that the pilots told the flight attendants not to evacuate. It was only, in fact, an announcement was made telling passengers to remain seated. It was only until one of those flight attendants saw that there was smoke in the cabin that the decision was finally made to bring those passengers to safety. Diane, that came a full 90 seconds after that plane came to a stop here.
These are staggering stories again tonight. Thanks so much, Cecilia Vega, reporting in. And now we have Thank you. And now we turn to the ongoing mystery of the deadly crash landing in San Francisco. And tonight, we have images of the surviving passengers returning to the burned-out plane where they almost died. ABC's David Curley tracking the late news for us right now. David.
Good evening, Diane. The head of the NTSB has just told us that all the flight systems on the 777 were operating properly. And there were actually 2 calls in the last 3 seconds to abort the landing. This as we hear the passengers' desperate calls to 911 and a solemn pilgrimage.
It was a caravan to commemorate their survival. Yesterday, about 30 passengers of the Asiana Flight 214 with family were taken by the NTSB back to the wreckage, some gathering in a circle, reflecting on the violent 777 crash they lived through.
Some have become emotional, and some have, started crying. Other was just like in disbelief.
They're running out.
As the nearly 300 passengers ran from the burning jet, some called 911. Tonight we're hearing their pleas.
She is severely burned. She will probably die soon if we don't get any help. We are working on getting additional ambulances to you.
For some, frustration.
We've been on the ground, I don't know, 20 minutes, a half hour. We're almost losing a woman here. We're trying to keep her alive.
San Francisco fire officials say within 18 minutes, 17 rescue vehicles and ambulances were on the scene or on the way. And what about the pilot learning to fly? He saw a flash of light just seconds before reaching the runway, but he reported to the NTSB, we learned tonight, that it did not affect his performance.
This jet hit so hard in the tail section that a first responder who walked into the plane said the front of it was pristine, but in the back of the plane it was a mangled mess. Part of the floor ripped away. Of course, then the fire destroyed almost the entire aircraft, Diane.
Every day a new vantage point on this. Thank you so much, David Curley.